Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Donoghue here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. We now have the details of the European Commission's Milk Production Reduction Scheme. If you cut your milk supply from October to December, you will be eligible for a payment. Our dairy editor, Jack Kennedy, answers questions from our digital editor, Thomas Hubert, to find out more.
Jack, I'm a dairy farmer, a typical Irish dairy farmer, working off grass, looking into the autumn and winter months. Should I consider the scheme? Is it going to affect the way I dry off, the way I feed in the last few months of the year if I do enter the scheme?
Yeah, I think every farmer has to look at the details, Thomas, for themselves, for their own individual situation. I mean, effectively, what you have to weigh up is the reduced output that you will forego if you dry off cows in November and December earlier. So you're foregoing that extra output in terms of monetary value, but you're being compensated to some extent with the 14.4 cent per litre compensation from the EU. Some of the preliminary analysis that we've done would suggest it's very marginal, the benefit for the supplier.
Why is that, and what kind of numbers have you found when you did your own calculations?
Why is it, Thomas? I suppose it's the fact that milk price for the spring milk producer gets higher with the higher autumn solids. So fat and protein is better in the October, November, December period, and that boosts the milk price. So if we assume the milk price is 23 or 24 cent per litre of a base price, put on top of that a 3 or 4 or 5 cent per litre premium because of the extra fat and protein in October, November, December, you come to a net price, give or take, around 28, 29 cents a litre. So effectively, if you forgo maybe up to 50% of the supply during the period October, November, December, you're foregoing quite a large part of the milk check for that period, and the compensation is not enough to make up the difference. Effectively, that's essentially what the problem is. Now, you will get your compensation check if you do reduce supply, and you will also, of course, reduce your costs. You'll have less meal feeding to cows, and you'll have less labour because you won't be milking the cows perhaps in November or December. So that's the way. That's what farmers have to weigh up for their own individual situations.
Okay, now what about the practical paperwork behind all this? What are you expected to do if you want to enter the scheme?
So this week, co-ops are going to write to each individual farmer, and they're going to tell them their reference period. So the reference period in terms of supply for October, November, December 2015, that's their reference period. So that's what they supplied last year, and if they can reduce up to 50% maximum of that volume. So if they supplied 40,000 litres, for example, last autumn, they can reduce by up to 20,000 litres for this coming autumn. So they will get that reference period, they will get the details of the scheme in a letter to the farm this week, and it's up to them then to go back to the co-op and with a plan for how much volume they're going to reduce by for the October, November, December period.
And that's important to note because you have to decide in advance before those 3 months how much you're going to cut by, and you need to stick to that, otherwise you're penalised.
Correct. And you have to have that decision made with your co-op by the 15th of September. So it's a very tight timeline to turn this around and to do your own sums and to see what will happen and, as you say, predict the future for your supply in October, November, December. And as you correctly point out, I mean, the compensation will be reduced if you don't reduce your supply by what you say you're going to reduce it by. So it can become very marginal indeed.
Okay, now there's more money available beyond this scheme. There's 11 million for Ireland and a similar envelope relative to size for other countries. The Commission has said this week they were hoping countries will use that money to further reduce milk supply. Any noises from other countries in Europe on how this could impact on production across Europe and act on prices?
Yeah, so and there's very different scenarios in other countries because typically Ireland is unusual because we've a very much reduced supply in the October, November, December period because the majority of our suppliers are spring milk producers, so their volumes are much lower compared to some other countries. So that's the first difference. But the secondly, as you say, countries, for example, France, have increased the pot of funds that are available for compensation. So hence, I understand that the compensation value in France is up up to 24 cent per litre for the first 5% reduction in supply, which is quite significant, and which is quite a lot more than the 14 cents a litre that will be available to Irish farmers at the moment. So yes, other countries can do other things to boost that compensation level, but as of yet we've no further details in terms of will it change for Ireland. I think we're probably set at the 14 cent per litre.
So in conclusion, am I correct to think maybe this is not going to be make or break for Irish farmers in terms of cutting their production, but it could be good on global markets, help a bit with reducing supply elsewhere in Europe and helping us getting a better price?
Yeah, typically I think that's where we're going to see the backwind from this, is that other countries that supply a lot of milk in October, November, where they have a flat annual supply curve, their reductions are going to be much more on a per farm basis, and their costs, of course, of producing during those winter months are a lot higher in general than Irish farms. So they will look to reduce supply. So hopefully, as you say, the backwind we'll get from this scheme will be a higher milk price during those autumn months and into early next year with the reduced supply across Europe.
Okay, Jack, thank you very much. And with more details and even a few handy calculators to do your own sums in Excel sheets on farmersjournal.ie. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
The IFA has just published the report it commissioned from a competition economist into the proposed deal between ABP and Slaney Foods. My colleague Amy McShane was at the launch of the report, and she spoke with IFA President Joe Healy, as well as author of the report, Dr. Pat McLaughlin.
Well, the report, I suppose, basically what it found was that this proposed deal will weaken competition further in a market that's already characterised by weak competition. Farmers have been well aware of that for years, that the beef processing sector, that there is very weak competition there. This report is done by an independent and very well respected economist, Dr. Pat McLaughlin, and it clearly highlights the concerns that farmers have about weak competition.
In the report it mentioned a comparison with England. They have an auctioning system where there's 20% of the market is for auction, whereas in Ireland it's single route. Do you think that Ireland should take up something similar?
Where we're caught there is in relation to the quality assurance scheme, and that's a disincentive to sell beef animals through the mart, which is an unfortunate part of the scheme. And I think farmers would feel very strongly that the factories know, the beef processors know that that's the case, and farmers that are finishing beef cattle, they more or less have to sell them straight to the factory.
What sort of effect do you think that this is going to have if the merger goes through? The Teagasc National Survey showed that most of their incomes this year, at least anyway, is coming from subsidies. So do you think that this could potentially push beef farmers out of business?
Well, I suppose there's 100,000 cattle farmers in one form or another, ultimately depending on the beef price at the end of the line. If you take maybe the store farmer or the weanling farmer, he's selling on to the beef farmer. So altogether there's 100,000 depending on the final price paid for beef. I think what we need to ensure, and what the IFA for the farmer members need to ensure, is that the maximum competition is kept in the marketplace, because it's only competition that will keep the price up, and that farmers have a choice of a couple of places to go to with their cattle and play one off the other. Now, there mightn't be an awful lot in the difference between them, but at least that you have a choice. As I said, that's what we have to ensure, that competition, the maximum amount of competition is kept there, so that the maximum amount of farmers remain viable. And as you rightly mentioned, Amy, the single farm payment and Teagasc figures would have shown down through the years, I think as late as last year, that on certain type cattle farms the single farm payment was equivalent to as high as 151% of the average farm income. So, not sustainable. We need to get a price for our product. And there's a strong feeling, that the farmer isn't getting their fair share in the food chain. He or she, the people that have looked after that animal for 2 years plus, produced a top quality product, met all the safety, traceability standards that's there, and there are quite a few of them. They're part of a quality assurance scheme, as I said, reaching all those standards, and yet they're the one person that isn't actually making any profit on the product. So the value in that product is gained by the processor and the retailer further up the food chain. So what we want is to get a fair share of what the consumer is paying for the product back into the farmer's pocket.
And like you said, Irish farmers are producing premium product, but they're not getting their fair share. What would you ask Minister Creed to do?
Well, I think, and we need it both at local level and at European level. We need mandatory regulation around the whole area of the food chain. And that mandatory regulation, and I refer back to Christine Tagone in the UK last year, where she took on Tesco, and she found four areas where their suppliers were not treated fairly. You know, what we need is that there's regulation there in place, but also, and there is a regulation to a certain degree in place at the moment since last February, when Minister Bruton at the time brought it in. But what we need to see is enforcement of that. At the moment, the producers of the raw material is not seeing enough enforcement. And, you know, the bottom line is to ensure that what the consumer is spending for their product, they don't have to spend any more for their product, but what they are spending is enough to give a share to the retailer, to the processor, but also to the farmer. Unfortunately, at the moment, that fair share isn't being passed back to the farmer.
Mm-hmm. ABP were made aware of the report and within days had changed the way they collected levies. The IFA subsequently suspended that. What's next? Will the IFA be sticking with the suspension?
Oh, absolutely. We're not for turning on it. The ABP cannot and will not be allowed to dictate to IFA how it conducts its business. Since our stance, there hasn't been one negative comment from farmers. In fact, the contrary, the extreme contrary has been the case, with farmers delighted that finally someone has stood up to ABP. And we very clearly did that, so we won't be compromised. We have a job of work to do for farmers, and that's what we'll do.
Joe, thank you very much. I'm here with economist of the report, Pat McLaughlin. So you talk about that real lack of competition in the market and how difficult it is for anyone new to come to the market and to build relationships with retailers. Do you think that this report is clear evidence that the farmer, the producer, is the one that's losing out in the market?
Yes, I think if you look at the facts on farm incomes and prices, it's very clear that while Irish beef is produced at a very high level, and we all know about the success of Irish beef internationally, I think it's fair to say that it comes at a very high cost for the farmer who provides the critical input into the supply chain. Teagasc have estimated that the viable beef price would be between at least €4 per kilogram and up to €4.50. And if you look just at the farming press on a weekly basis, at best the beef price is at the lower end of that, very, very much, if even, at €4. So it's a precarious market. I think that's the way I described it. It's a precarious market for farmers.
And as well, you mentioned that the Hereford and Angus, the competition authority, would maybe look at it in further detail. It's one of the narrowest market. Can you just tell me a wee bit about that?
So what we've looked at in the report, we've looked at broad and narrow markets, and the narrowest market that we've looked at, which is probably the most relevant market, is the market for premium cattle, steers and heifers that meet Industry Ireland weight and grade specifications. Now, within that, there is the possibility in the report that the authorities might look at Angus and Hereford speciality breeds of cattle within that. There's a paucity of, there's very little data to do that, but we're satisfied that while they might look at that, we're certainly satisfied that the key market for premium cattle meeting those standards, those high quality standards, that's the key market looked at, and it's well examined in the report.
So the report has been sent to the relevant competition authorities here in Dublin, in London and in Brussels. What are the main recommendations from the report?
The report really is designed in the event if the transaction is notified, and it hasn't been notified yet, or hasn't been notified to DG Comp. But if it is, then this report is designed in part to help inform their assessment of the competitive effects of the transaction. So it's like a friend to the competition authority's assessment of it. Mm-hmm. And we're saying basically that based upon the evidence that there's weak competition currently, and here are the sources of weak competition, and then there is a risk then that the proposed joint venture would lead to a further weakening of competition. That's the main finding of the report.
Pat, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Better weather in the past week has helped with harvest, but much work remains to be done. Let's get the latest from the fields with our tillage editor, Andy Doyle.
Thomas, we've made terrific progress in the last week thanks to what was better than expected weather, that is for most parts of the country. We kind of moved from either side of 50% harvest a week ago to probably well into the last 20%, all going well by the end of this week. And that's an average across the board, so obviously beans aren't harvested yet. A lot of spring oats isn't harvested. So there's been great harvest progress on spring barley and winter wheat specifically. And thankfully, reports on yield and quality have been quite good. There are variable yields for sure. There are 2-ton yields on spring barley, but thankfully they're scarce. In general, yield levels would be somewhat lower in North Leinster than the rest of the country on spring barley. But in the main, we've had a lot of 3-ton plus crops, and that's going to be a help. It's not going to be a salvation, but it will be a help for growers in the current season. And quality has been excellent as well, with one major problem continuing, and that is that skinning issue causing rejection in malting barley, where in the Glanbia Dairygold catchment, as much as 50% of crops, or even over 50% of crops, have been rejected.
We've had advice on that actually, Pat O'Toole, as well, as yourself was writing in the past few weeks, and we have the archives at farmersjournal.ie. Could you maybe remind our readers of a few essential tips if they're faced with this skinning issue?
Well, look, skinning is something that's set by the environment and the variety. If you have it, then all you can kind of do is to try and adjust the combine settings to be slightly kinder to the grain in threshing, in order to minimise it. You won't stop it. It's not the ultimate cause. It's just able to, in a sense, make a softer passage through. But unfortunately for the grain that would be going into Glanbia and Dairygold, they have a second quality criteria, which is specific weight. And if you don't thrash it cleanly, you could end up being caught on specific weight if you gain on having somewhat less skinning on the sample. So it's a catch-22 scenario, unfortunately, for those people. And of course, if you're rejected from malting barley, then you lose all of the premium, and that's an integral part of the possibility of making a margin this year. So it's a hugely important issue for growers.
Now, how are things looking for the next steps? Oil and protein seeds?
We're the latter part of the harvest, which will be beans, oilseed, spring wheat, spring oats. They're all coming extremely fast, much faster than we might have expected, given that there's spring barley crops in the country that are not yet ripe. So it is important, and it's good to have them coming so early, particularly for beans where the acreage is quite high, for people to be able to clear those fields now in the month of September or thereabouts. It's a great boost for planting the next crop, and already this year we've had a lot of people who report very high yields of wheat following beans, so it's an encouragement to be able to get in early and get the job done well. I guess the major exception to progress in the harvest to date has been the problems that continue for the growers across the west and northwest, where wet continues to just be a huge hindrance to progress. We've seen examples of people, almost losing combines in fields trying to get through them. We've winter barley harvest still trying to be salvaged up that part of the world, and while the rest of the country enjoyed a week of good harvest weather, most people up there had 2.5 days of harvest opportunity in the past week. So things are difficult for people that end of the world, and it's important to state that.
This is a good roundup of Ireland. What are you hearing from other major producing regions and markets at the moment?
Thomas, the major influence in the market this week, where international prices have fallen fairly substantially, certainly down to new low levels across the global trading markets, is being driven by the recent report that said that we're about to have an additional 23 million tonnes added to the global output. And that 23 million tonnes is all surplus to demand. So all of a sudden it has obviously dampened price expectations and driven down prices. That particularly matters to corn, maize in our book, because once maize prices start falling, then maize begins to take over space in Irish rations. And that has a big impact for demand, for price and everything else. But we do have excellent quality, and that's a major plus. On the European end, there was a recent report from France which says that while they have had a big problem with weather, and particularly with regard to milling, that hagbugs, which are generally associated with bad weather for the milling industry because it causes sprouting and that degrades the starch, etc., for milling, that's in general hagbug levels are not nearly as low as might have been anticipated, and that's a plus for them. But because they didn't get big yields and they didn't get good grain fill, one of their major limitations will be on specific weight or KPH. Much of their KPH level will not get them into the upper end of their price or quality brackets, but they do have a product still that probably can compete in particularly the African market. So that's a plus for us, because the bulk of the of any surplus French grain is unlikely to be in the feed market as a consequence. And we were really worried in this part of the world that if a lot of milling wheat was rejected in France, that it was going to have to find feed markets to compete with feed grains like spring barley or like our feed winter wheat elsewhere in the community. So that's a little bit of good news in relative terms.
Okay, Andy, thank you very much. We've harvest reports this week in the Irish Farmers Journal and throughout the season at farmersjournal.ie. Thank you very much.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Minister for Agriculture Michael Creed was at a debate organised by Macron na Firma in Macroom in County Cork last Friday. There he met Irish Farmers Journal news correspondent Odile Evans, who asked him about income tax and TAMS payments.
You made a commitment there to re-examine the suitability of income tax averaging. Maybe you could just expand on that, and do you expect to see it in place for this budget?
Well, no, I mean, the point I'm making is we have received a number of submissions from various farm organisations, including MACRA this evening and others, and this is a point that has been constantly raised, and it's in the context of provisions that are already made in previous years about income averaging. And what we're looking at see is if we can finesse that as a commitment in the programme for government to look at that to deal with the volatility issue. And we're examining all those options presently. And that commitment is in the programme for government. It's not just a commitment I made here tonight.
And then on TAMS, there's a lot of frustration over delay in payments now. Is there any commitments given on that yet? Well,
the payments are up and running. In fact, what has surprised us a little bit is, and we were slow to getting the payments up and running, but I did give a commitment that we would have them up by the end of July, and they are. What has actually taken us back a little is the numbers that are coming online for payment. I mean, you have to have your tax clearance certificate, you have to have completed a farm safety course. The numbers are small yet, but we're ready and are making payments presently.
Okay, so there are payments going out. And do you have any idea how many have gone out?
I don't have the figures, but they're small.
They're small enough, okay.
Yeah, but they are gone out.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
There's been much talk around the BVD eradication programme in the past few days, with an independent report recommending the continuation of tissue tagging. So where are we with the programme? Irish Farmers Journal livestock specialist Darren Carty sits down with Animal Health Ireland Chief Executive Joe Flaherty to find out more.
Joe, I suppose maybe to set the scene, BVD eradication programme was introduced in a voluntary phase in 2012, compulsory phase in 2013, and there has been some quite remarkable results so far.
There have been, Darren, yes. So the current situation is that the prevalence of the disease has fallen to about 25% of what it was when we started the compulsory phase of the programme in January of 13. Bear in mind that this is the first time that the Irish cattle sector has come together in this kind of a voluntary programme, eradication programme, and I think for a model of this type, the results have been very, very successful. Obviously, we would want to see the programme move on to the point of eradication now as quickly as possible, but I think we can be reasonably satisfied with the results achieved to date.
Yeah, I suppose maybe that's where, maybe to take up from there, is that there has been huge improvements, and it's really to get that final push and maybe just to get it over the line. And there has been some developments in 2016 that have helped, and just looking at the results there, this time last year there were 719 herds that had retained PI calf at this stage. That's now fallen to 201 herds. The department have brought in a few restrictions, maybe for listeners that aren't aware what they are, and maybe how that has fast-tracked maybe to get that impressive reduction, that there's 0.27 herds now out of, I think you were saying earlier on, 83,500 breeding herds in the country, so it is a good development.
Yeah, exactly. There are currently somewhere between 200 and 250 herds on the database in total across the various years of the programme. that have a retained PI on the farm, and that is out of 83,500 breeding herds. So I think that is a measure of very good progress in relation to the holding on to PIs by a minority of farmers. Nonetheless, we want to get that figure down to zero, and I think that we're all engaged on the task of what additional measures will help us to get that figure down to zero in as quick a time frame as possible. There has been no doubt that the introduction of herd restrictions in the case of farms that are retaining PIs has been very successful in terms of encouraging farmers to relinquish those PIs sooner. And in addition to that, the Department of Agriculture has also embarked on issuing what we call biosecurity notifications to neighbouring farms as well. I suppose from an implementation group of point of view, we would like to see both those measures progress more rapidly even now from this point forward than they have up to now. And I think we can be fairly assured that with a more rapid approach to those measures that we will see even further progress.
Yeah, it's because it is something, I suppose, that farmers have been very good and very quick, I suppose, maybe to take in and to take on board. And it's unfortunate if it was a small, say, number that was maybe to hold it up, that or that was to push out the programme, that say you're still on target to meet that sort of 2020 eradication, but it is all based, or is it all under proviso that say that the department would continue to put them restrictions in place and possibly, I suppose, if needs be, take the final move of compulsory eradication. And I know that, say, you're looking and sort of seeing how measures go, but is this something, say, that the department or sorry, that AHI wants to explore? That are you going to push on maybe with the department? And I know you were saying that it's something that the implementation group has said that you want to meet the minister, that a few issues have been raised in the last week, that in particular there was a meeting between the technical working group, and there has been some talk there to say there was a report said that instead of maybe moving to where was initially envisaged of, say, your 3 years testing and in your surveillance report, that could now be moving to tissue tag testing for another few years.
Yeah, well, the first thing to say is that we do want to see the existing measures that encourage removal of PIs maintained and enhanced, and it is really only the Department of Agriculture that can deliver some of those measures. And we are interested as an implementation group in meeting with the Minister to explain some of the concerns we have in relation to progress on a couple of fronts. But more positively, I think, to engage with the Minister and with his department in terms of moving the programme forward to the point of eradication as quickly as possible. The model does show us that we can reach a point of zero PIs in the national herd by 2020. That is predicated on there continuing to be very good compliance with the getting rid of PIs as soon as they're identified. And we've also started the process of looking at some additional measures that might help that accelerated removal of PIs even further along the line. What was presented to the implementation group last week was a presentation by the technical working group and an expert commissioned by the technical working group looking at various aspects of the programme. So, as I say, one of the positive outcomes of that meeting was that it shows us that the programme is on course to achieve eradication zero PIs by 2020. And it opens up a couple of questions in relation to, well, what is the best method of getting us there? So the presentation that was made last week was really outlining the evidence and some options, but it's really for the implementation group to take the decisions in relation to what happens next. And I think in this instance, because some of the issues on the table are of critical importance and can only be delivered by the Department of Agriculture, that it is important that we do have a meeting with the Minister to discuss these various issues.
Yeah, I suppose there is a few side issues that, say, while maybe not directly affecting the BVD scheme, they may indirectly, and that's with the whole area that our listeners will be aware that there's a lot of talk around new tagging tenders and even, say, a change in tag. Is there concerns for AHI in the implementation group that could maybe have some knock-on implications for BVD testing?
Yeah, we certainly do have some concerns in relation to the new tag approval process, and it's one of the reasons that we are seeking to meet with the department and with the minister, is to try to get to the bottom of those concerns. One of the potential knock-on effects would be on the accreditation of the labs that currently carry out the testing for BVD. So we are, as you can appreciate, very, very keen to ensure that this new tag approval process doesn't interfere with the logistics of BVD testing. I think one thing we can definitely say about the programme is that Irish farmers have really taken to tag testing in an extraordinarily positive way. The rate of uptake of the programme, albeit that it's a compulsory programme, we still have extremely high levels of participation by farmers, and almost 100% of the calves that are born and registered in any year we now have a BVD test for across each of the years of the programme. And the tiny fraction that we don't have a result for, usually these are small herds, and there's another explanation there, and the department is following up in relation to those. But so that aspect of the programme has worked well. The tag testing, the logistics of tag testing has worked very well. The rate of empty samples, which is another measure, has been falling across the various years of the programme. So naturally we're very concerned that any change to tag testing doesn't have a negative impact on the logistics from a farmer's point of view, and also that it doesn't impact on the accreditation of the laboratories. And those are two areas in which we're looking for reassurance from the department.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Joe, and we wish you all the best, and we hope that Minister Creed answers your calls for a quick and speedily meeting, because it's a very important disease for farmers. It's very important that, I suppose, it stays on track, and we're so close to the finishing line. It's good if we can get that final push and get it eradicated. So for more on this story and to see the latest updates, please see this week's Farmers Journal edition.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
The weather pattern has been completely different between north and south of Ireland recently. But even under difficult conditions, County Tyrone suckler farmer Oliver McKenna makes the most of every blade of grass on his farm. He hosted a farm walk with the Ulster Grassland Association last week, and he spoke with our Northern Ireland editor, David Wright.
We're based in Askra here, between Omagh and Ballygally and County Tyrone. I'm running 50 suckler cows, 29 spring calving and 21 autumn calving, and we're using a fair wee bit of AA, going towards possibly 100% AA.
You've got a number of you were talking earlier on there about so around your cattle, and you've got different batches, different bulls, steers, heifers. What's your system? What system are you working?
Well, spring calving cows are calving February, March, goes mid-February to first week 2 of April. We have been keeping them as steers, the male calves as steers. Traditionally we would have sold some of the bullocks at the end of May after a period at grass, normally start to mid-March. As numbers increase, we'll be looking at possibly feeding them as bulls. The autumn herd, we've been feeding them as bulls on the 16 months. They calve August, September, and the bulls will go into the house year 12, 13 months of age. Target weight 450 kilos. And we would have actually done a wee bit better than that this year. They'll be away before Christmas. All heifers are hopefully suitable replacements. All breeding's focused on maternal breeding, because we've been building numbers of cows over the past 5-6 years, starting to pay off, keeping that maternal breeding coming through.
Yes, and seeing around your farm this evening, Oliver, you've made great progress in the last few years. Maybe can you outline some of that progress, and also maybe give us a bit of an insight into the key factors involved in getting to where you've got to now?
So I suppose back 5-6 years ago we had about 30 cows, what we call spring cows, that started calving in February and were still calving in August. So we started to tighten that up, and the obvious thing was to split it into 2 batches, keep the August ones in August, and maybe slip some of the July ones into that. Tighten it up 2 batches, tight calving period, targeting 10 10 weeks, and some good years you'll do it under that, but even it is run to 10 weeks, you're still not doing too bad. And as we've went along, gradually increased numbers and took the grassland with us as we've done that. So on the same area, we're carrying a lot more cows, we're carrying a lot more followers, we're getting much more production out of the followers, simply by better grassland management, keeping the grass in front of them, rotating them around a system, rotational grazing, and we would have found we can carry more numbers and get more production out of them.
And you were asked a question earlier on about Conacre. Perhaps you'd repeat your answer?
Well, Conacre, like I have ground rented, but what they were saying was a more extensive system, but I would find that even in that extensive system, you won't even get as good a production, and if you could put your own land in better shape, and like I would be concentrating on that, I suppose we're limited in acres, and we have a bit of ground rented, and we maybe couldn't survive without it, but I wouldn't consider going out and taking lots and lots of acres and running a more extensive system, because you're going to have a big rent cost, and you're maybe not getting even out of that land what it can produce, and you're probably not taking out of your own land what it can produce. The basics of it is getting the pH right, getting the P and the K right, and having the stock there to make the best use of it when you have the grass there.
Okay, yep, it's quite a simple message in one regard. Oliver, you've made great progress and excellent visit this evening, and wish you all the best in the future.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Meanwhile, our building specialist Peter Varley was at the Energy and Agriculture Conference recently. There he spoke with Teagasc's renewable energy specialist Barry Caslin to take stock of Ireland's obligations and the risk we are facing if we fail to reach our green energy targets.
The targets Ireland have to achieve for 2020 is that we have to get 16% of our total final consumption of energy has to come from renewables by 2020. At the moment we're about 8.6%, so we're just over halfway. And those targets go back to 1990. So essentially in 25 years we're at just over the halfway mark. And the question is, will we go the other half in the space of another 4 years? Because these targets have to be achieved for 2020. The most scenario analysis would indicate that no, we are not going to achieve our targets. We are going to be shy of the target by maybe 2%, and if we do nothing, we could be 3 or 4% missing those targets. SEAI have predicted, that Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland have predicted that for every 1% we miss our targets, we could be getting fines from anywhere from 65 to 100 million euro per 1% that we miss the target. So if we miss the targets by 4%, that means we'd end up with fines of 400 million. So I think the emphasis of talks today, and the reason that I think that we see more engagement at government level as well in this whole area, is that we'd rather pay the money out to develop the sector and get renewable energy happening on farms, get PV cells above on roofs of sheds of farms, get biomass boilers installed in pig units, poultry units, mushroom units, rather than paying the money out in fines at the end of 2020.
You mentioned today as well, Barry, about supply chains. Can you just go into more detail for the podcast today?
Yeah, farmers like structures, and I suppose structures are there for most enterprises within agriculture. Whether it's beef, there's a mechanism to trade your beef animal, to sell your beef to a meat factory. There's a mechanism to sell your milk to a dairy co-op. There's a mechanism to sell your cereals, crops to a merchant. Those mechanisms are only kind of getting in place for bioenergy at the moment. We are only seeing it evolving, the market's evolving. We do need to see instill more confidence that end users know that farmer supply chain groups have the capability and knowledge to supply them with the quality of material, whether it's wood chip, whether it's straw pellets, whether it's straw chip or straw bales, that they're able to supply them with the quality and quantity of material on an ongoing basis, and that they won't let down the end user by supplying poor quality material or material of the wrong moisture content or with the wrong chemistry for the particular boiler. So I think training of supply chain groups is going to be essential here, and we are going to need some level of support for the development of biomass trade centres. That's a trade centre I'm talking about there, a mechanism by which local farmers can come together, maybe 10 or 12 farmers. They can create a supply chain themselves, that they can take in biomass, be it willow chip, wood chip from forestry, miscanthus chip or bales or straw bales, and maybe process that on site, dry it on site, convert it into pellets, convert it into logs, create it into a form that the end market requires it in. And there's different ways we can utilise the various feedstocks. I always say there isn't just one technology that's going to help us meet our targets of 16% by 2020. It's going to be a combination of different technologies, and we need farmers to engage in this. If farmers don't believe in it, they own the land, they control whether crops will be grown or not, whether we go down the forestry route, whether we produce grass for anaerobic digestion, whether we produce straw that it'll go for a market for biomass and energy generation. Farmers will not engage in this process unless they see a return on their investment, unless they see that this commitment, I suppose, at various levels, be it end users and be it in demand-led policies, that will encourage them to go down this route.
The Minister was here this morning, Barry, Dennis Naughton. Did he give any sort of way in which the government is going to set out its policy, or any grant schemes that maybe farmers could avail of in the future to implement energy efficient, let's say, boilers on their farms?
Well, Minister Naughton, I suppose, first of all, I say it's the month of August, Peter, and we were delighted that he came here. It was during his holiday time, and he did attend an event like this, and he is fairly new in the job. We were delighted to have him here, and it did demonstrate to us that there is a commitment to developing the whole energy area and creating the markets which is badly needed, and demand-led policies. He did allude to the renewable heat incentive that he said will be up and running in the year 2017. Now, to be quite honest with you, you've heard it from a lot of people already that we've heard about the renewable heat incentive, that it's supposed to be up and running for the last 3 or 4 years. And we had heard last year it will be up and running in 2016 this year. We would hope that it will actually happen, that we will have a renewable heat incentive, ideally very early in 2017. I know there's going to be a consultation phase on this RHI, this renewable heat incentive, early in September. For example, in Northern Ireland, nearly every poultry unit, every pig unit, every mushroom unit has a biomass boiler at this stage. They made mistakes with their RHI scheme, and I think they're mistakes that we can learn from here in the Republic of Ireland, that we don't make the same ones.
Barry, thanks very much. There's a lot of work to be done, but hopefully, as you say, this time next year we'll see a lot of changes.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, let's sit down with a nice book and Irish Country Living consumer editor Ciara Leahy. She goes through the reading list for this month's book club with Aisling Hussey.
There actually was a common theme that ran through all three of the books this month, in the sense that they were all set in two moments in time. It's interesting because each one really looks at how the events of the past affects the present day, but there were three very different books set in different locations.
Okay, so the first was My Husband's Wife by Jane Corrie. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, this Penguin book is one that if you're really looking to get your teeth stuck into a book this month, this is one that will keep you engrossed for hours. And what was interesting is it was like two books in one. Once you get to the end of part one, you feel like you've completed an entire story, but then it brings you forward 15 years and you realise it's about to get a whole lot juicier. It centres around the character of Lily, who meets Ed and marries him in a whirlwind, only to realise after saying their vows that she doesn't really know her husband that well. It was pretty quick, so you know. Okay. There isn't too much time to think about it because she's actually involved in she's a lawyer involved in a case where a man convicted of murdering his girlfriend, she's trying to get him off the charges. At the same time, Ed, who's an artist, is getting a little too involved with the downstairs neighbours, specifically a little girl called Cara, who becomes the artist's muse. And basically a chain of events unravels which binds them all together that I can't tell you about because it'll ruin the book. It's a really dark story with a string of characters who are really flawed, but it's a really good read, and it's one that you can really get your teeth stuck into. It covers a lot of themes: crime, marital issues. It touches a lot on autism, actually.
So maybe it's not one that you're kind of reading as a kind of easy read or whatever.
No, not necessarily an easy read, but if you want to get really engrossed into a book, it's good reading.
So, speaking of easy reading, The House on Sunset Lake.
I loved this one. Now, look, I suppose I really loved it because it's set in southern America, in the state of Georgia, in Savannah, Georgia. And I was actually there on my holidays this year, so I was like kind of reliving it. It's set in a plantation house, and I actually visited that and wrote about it in Irish Country Living. So I kind of felt like I was right there, but you could really Tasmina Perry, the author, her descriptions are absolutely fabulous. It's kind of a before and after story again. You have Jennifer and Jim, She's this preppy American golden girl. He's a quirky British boy over in the States for the summer, and it's set on the shores of this lake, and it's all about what could have been the most romantic story of their lives. However, the stories, the chapters of the past are interspersed with the present times, and it's obvious that something didn't go right for these two lovebirds. And now the house lies abandoned. Jim actually returns after 20 years as a hotel developer to bring it back to life. So you're actually jumping from the past and present a lot during this book, but you realise the events that occurred in that summer of '95 came to close to changing their lives forever. And it's really a book that it actually got me quite rallied up. There's a lot of what ifs, maybes, what could have been that affect basically how their lives turned out.
Yeah, it sounds a bit similar to Last Letter from My Lover, or like The Notebook or something like that.
It actually is, and it's like, oh, why didn't it happen? It's a really nice, if you've gone for a last minute holiday break, pack that one in the suitcase.
You can be a bit romantic, I suppose. A bit of unrequited love. And your final book is The Reunion. It's written by an Irish author called Roisin Meany.
Yeah, and you know what? Twitter's a great thing, because I felt the need to actually tweet Roisin one night, giving out to her for creating such a page turner, because there was a particularly late night and I had work in the morning, but I just couldn't put it down. And again, look, this is coincidental, but this is another kind of past and present novel. It's actually set in Ireland and looks at the lives of these two sisters, Caroline and Eleanor. And Caroline is the shy, studious sister, the one that never gets into trouble with the parents. Mm-hmm. Eleanor, on the other hand, she's the younger sister. She's bubbly, vivacious. She's got the handsome boyfriend, even if her studies suffer as a result. But in their late teenage and early adult years, both sisters unfortunately find themselves in traumatic circumstances. Actually, two completely different circumstances that affect them, and it basically alters their lives forever. And you fast forward then to 2015, and they're both forced to face up to the ghosts of their past, really. And I suppose what's really interesting about the book is the life lesson you can actually take away from it. How two sisters, both raised in the same house with similar values, the same parents, react to adversity in their life so differently. Yeah. While one crumbles, resulting in the destruction of her family life, the other perseveres and becomes a real success. So I suppose, it's an easy read, but it's got a very good underlining message that you can take a lot away from.
Yeah, it's kind of meatier than your regular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So you must give me a loan of those books now. They sound brilliant. So all the details of those books are in this week's Irish Country Living. Thanks very much, Ciara.
Thanks, Aisling.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app, and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.